Victor is the Deputy Director of the West Point Simulations Center, a position he served in since 2020. Before that, he was a training specialist and operations manager at West Point. Victor is also the Director of Army West Point Esports and the United States Military Academy's Collegiate Competitive Esports Program.
Yeah.
He is also a veteran of the U.S. Army. Victor graduated from USC in 2015 with a degree in game art and design, and later with a degree in learning design and technology from USC's Rossier School of Education. He brings a blend of experiences, bringing a fresh perspective to the application of learning design in conjunction with the use of modeling and simulation technology. Welcome, Victor. Victor, is there anything else you'd like to add to the intro?
No, I nailed it. It's just the whole community for learning design is fantastic. So I saw all your podcasts and stuff. I was like, oh, I definitely want to be a part of this because obviously the New York family, the state of New York family, the SUNY family and all that stuff is really, really exciting. And I like the opportunity for us to be able to discuss, our unique perspective in regards to things we understand as learning designers and educational designers and how it applies to something like a service academy. So it's pretty cool to be here.
Perfect. Okay, so we're going to start right out with our first question. And that is, what inspired you to get into esports and simulations?
So simulations was more of the hierarchy for how esports got created. So as my role as deputy director, I have the unique responsibility of taking either an Army program of record, which would be defined as a program that the Army has selected to distribute to all military bases, their trading commands, their forces command. And this investment could be in hardware, software, different things like that, that would accentuate any commander's requirement for training. So these programs of record are funded by the taxpayer. They're part of the overall mission for the Department of Defense. And in doing so, we can take delivery of these pieces of equipment. For this particular one, it's software called Virtual Battlespace, a very sandbox style software that allows an instructor or a student to go in and just really experiment and create learning environments for themselves for deliberate practice. So it's my role to take this type of software, create a learning environment that allows our core curriculum or different departments within the curriculum to use this technology. And then we had these physical training systems, which are called what we normally call TADs or training aids devices. These could be simulators for technical pieces of equipment, different weapon systems, and things like that. So at our core, we have some of the physical hardware simulations equipment, and then pretty much a 75 station lab that can modify itself for every course as it comes in or any of its unique applications. So having that in place, students would rotate through using the simulations. And then one day in 2019, 3 of our students stood up and said, hey, could we use this stuff for something else? And we were like, well, yeah, what's your idea? I was like, well, we play this game called Rainbow Six Siege. So immediately, from our position as staff and faculty instructional designers, we can recognize right there that there is passion in the execution of what they wanted to do. And in that passion, we have the opportunity then to layer that learning, so then they persist. So I was able to take that advantage of that moment and say, hey, well, if you want to do this kind of stuff, we've got to work together, and we're going to come up with a great program here. And they had to go through all of everything they needed to do to get it started.
Tell me a little bit more about the students and like, when did this happen? Because you were doing the simulation center for a while, and then the students sort of organically and spontaneously said, hey, it seems like, this is a tactical shooter here. This is something that may reinforce some of the things that we're learning, in our simulation center. Is this something you'd be okay with? Tell me about first how that landed with you, and then maybe when you communicated it with others in your, in your area, how it landed with them.
Well, when it immediately started to happen, we needed to understand where they're coming from. So it really gets down to, verbally discussing with them, hey, tell me more about what you mean. So it comes to find out men and women now that are in the gaming realm, not necessarily esports either, like the higher level competitive esports, but just a gamer in general, casually, at some point are going to congeal as friends or as a group. And then the next natural state for them is to either compete against other friends or people that are just randomly online. So what I got from them is that they're at that stage. They were already playing on their own. They kind of knew the game very well. They were enticed to play the next level of the game, and we actually had the better equipment that they would want to be able to use. So I think their ask was just to have that side by side, player environment that they were looking for the next stage of their play.
Okay.
So that's what, if you can imagine, that's why it happened.
Okay, thank you. So I'll back up just a little bit about the simulation center itself. I've had a little bit of experience in various bases with simulation centers, and there's some impressive equipment, but I haven't been there recently. And you did talk about a modular virtual battle space. And the first thing that came to mind for me was Dave's mod, which is right where you've seen there's a number of videos online where they're like, how would 10,000 Roman soldiers do against 100 modern US soldiers kind of thing, right? So they're constantly playing around with this modular space in Dave's mod. I'm wondering if virtual battle space shares any of those sort of, plug and play characteristics and how that might have been developed, but most importantly, how you use it in your space.
So references for your listeners might be a game called Arma, if anybody's ever heard of Arma. The parent company for Arma actually built virtual battle space as well. So it's that style. But imagine yourself having the ability to author the most basic components of the platform. So a very basic map. You're able to move, pre-built models for buildings and vehicles, and then avatars or non-playable characters, and have that sandbox style. So it's not to that scale where you're gonna have a million Terminators versus like, whatever. It's pretty much a group of 20 enemy you can put over in a wooded area, and then you can have your personal character, which we would label as a playable character, have that first person view, and then you would interface with the game. What's really, really a selling point for us is the real-time editing capability. So for some reason, we have a class of 20 students and things are not going as well as we would want. We can actually dial down the learning in real time. It's going really good, and they're all kind of hyped up and they're confident in their skill set. Well, we can make it really hard within a matter of seconds, because I can literally go to the administrator machine and copy paste all 20 enemy and immediately drop another 20 enemy, and they'll have their own behaviors and things like that. So very similar to Arma, but with none of the gamification aspects of weapon systems and shields and things like that.
Right. So realistic version.
Yeah, as close as you can. Yeah.
So I would say that's probably closest to what we would describe as real-time instruction or just-in-time instruction. Is a buzzword that we've used in the learning design community for a while. So you are able to basically play with the dials in real time, so to speak, right? One of the dials being the enemy behavior, perhaps the number of enemies themselves. My guess is you could probably play with terrain.
Yes.
Not to get too far in the weeds, but are there, I guess, NPCs or friendly bots or non-player characters in the environment, as well as the sort of quote enemies? Do you control all of those things?
You can. So you almost likely in the learning design phase, it would be best if you sat down with your instructors and you did work with your course directors. We do something called faculty development lessons, where we sit down with all the teachers within the course and say, hey, this is the scenario that's going to support your lesson number 10 or lesson number 11. There are independent characters, there are civilians, there's animals, there's all different things that would add a little bit of those layers of confusion. For example, a simulated group of soldiers are driving through a small town, and whatever reason that there's a crowd in the street. Okay, what do you do? And then you have, obviously there's a concern that there's enemy also in the city and stuff like that. So the behavior models for the actual characters are not fantastic. They're not going to act exactly how we would expect, but they'll do just good enough so that the instructors have what they need to be able to say, okay, demonstrate to me your understanding of the learning we discussed in lessons number 7, 8, and 9, and you almost use it as a usable lab given the time constraints. Yeah.
My guess is that the instructors probably, the more they become familiar with the simulation itself and the software, probably start thinking about their design and their learning in terms of what the software can do. There's probably a bit of a ratcheting effect. But I sort of have a more nuanced question. Do you have any feedback loops for the designers of the software itself, so that they might add features or characteristics like AI bots, AI, integration with civilians, that sort of thing?
A lot of things we bring back to them are their triggers. Any type of initialization statements that might be in the software that really doesn't require a human instructor to initiate because we're limited on staff. You can imagine that a lot of your instructor staff at K through 12 or high school level just have so much to do. So we really want to have the instructors build, for example, the student runs to a certain part of the street, that trigger would initiate a movement of a vehicle that's on its way now. That kind of stuff, the developers didn't dig down too deep because you'll have a problem with collisions or something where the vehicle will start coming, but it'll just go off the road because there's a rock in the way. And it's a little bit of unrealism that happens with some of that. So we send that feedback loop to them like, hey, why did this huge enemy vehicle decide to divert for a pebble? And they're like, oh, and then they make small changes.
Okay, and is that how? Maybe describe that loop a little bit. How long does that loop take to close, and what's the responsiveness? You know, because you're not using commercial off-the-shelf software here. This is part of the Department of Defense's software. So my guess is they would want accuracy, relevancy, fidelity to the real situation as much as possible. So there would be motivation to close the loop if they're being trained in a way that isn't necessarily authentic or with high fidelity.
Absolutely. And it really comes down to relationships. So like we know a couple people that are on the developer side that are good friends. You have a situation where you can buy a software and then you can have like maintenance costs that'll get you a 24-hour helpline. We just have to be aware that if the change for the software is so dynamic, it has to go to a higher level within the Army that made the initial purchase because that change might have to actually filter to everybody that's now using it, not necessarily just the Academy. So definitely the relationships we have with our friends within Bohemia Interactive. Hey man, did you know your stuff is doing this? A quick email and they could answer back maybe 2 or 3 days. Like, no kidding. Send me a snapshot or send me whatever whatever it is. But a formal, it could take a couple weeks.
Okay, it's a lot shorter than what the loop that we might see in a school system sometimes when it comes to software, because we have the same loop. I work for a couple of different companies as a consultant, and when we work in schools, the teachers will identify a problem. They will escalate that to some sort of, instructional support, which may go to technical support. And in terms of changing the software itself, they usually just put things in a queue for the redevelopment cycle, which happens sometimes every 2 to 5 years. Right?
Wow.
They just say like, this is just a known issue. When you get to this module, just skip it. For small changes, like module changes, they might change it relatively quickly if it's just a technical error. But if it's anything pedagogical or significant, it tends to go into a queue. So it might seem like a long time, but 2 to 3 weeks is pretty responsive.
Yeah. And like if we did get to that higher level, though, action, though, like there's something dead wrong with the software at the highest level, we would be similar because there's so many middle agencies in the Army that would be, and like for example, the Army would purchase the software from Bohemia Interactive Simulations, and then it would go to a review section, what we call PEOs or PEO STRI, in these different agencies within the Sims world that would then review it, look for all the vulnerabilities inside of it, and make it available to all agencies in the Army. That takes a while. I would say months on top of months. So, it's like we always deal with too, is that we see the newest version out by the developer and we're like 4 years back because they've been scrutinizing the software for that long. I'm like, dude, we could just, right, and you just throw your hands up because that's the process.
I hear you. Okay, so next question for you is, I guess, challenges. I don't know if you caught my TED Talk that I did on esports, but the reason I put that TED Talk out there was that I was facing a lot of challenges within the esports space in terms of people having a preformed opinion about the value of video games, sort of shaping their perception of what esports was and what value it might have. And I wonder, I'm sure you face some similar things, but I wonder maybe if you could describe how it was received at West Point after it came organically from the students to you. What were your conversations like with the folks around you about this?
Well, we were lucky. We were lucky that work that was already done, work similar to yours, was already there as a reference. Yeah, I understood when we first launched it. I haven't been at the academy for that long, for as long as I have, that we were going to hit that wall right away. So knowing that, we also needed to understand the core leadership at the academy is a certain state, is a certain demographic. These are senior leaders. These are senior officers that have seen a lot of different capability with human beings and their performance. They're also recognize that humans are humans, especially soldiers, and they enjoy those things. They like playing cards. They like playing video games and things like that. So they understood that. So it was very important for us to make sure that the ask for the program to be an actual program at the academy was rooted in quantitative and qualitative data. So that, and we also made sure we took the time to nest it within the mission of the academy and within the different pillars that exist to be true, that everybody understands is true: military, character, academic, and physical. So now take those four pillars and try to make the connection legitimately. I mean, look, we want everything to go great for us, so we may like skew everything to make it fit legitimately, and that's not what you want to do when you build your foundational program. You want to be honest about the situation, and you want to be honest about the connectivity to those pillars. So when we took each one,
Can I
obviously,
pause you for just a second? Military, academic, character, and what was the fourth?
it's and physical.
Physical.
Yeah, and we get a chance to talk again. We could talk about how all four of those bleed over inside of each other, because one always accents the other. So when you're dealing with physical training, you might have military aspects to that, and then the way you'll make personal choices against your physical leads towards how your character leads. So when I looked at the program, I said, hey, how are we going to militarily? Okay, think about the platform, Rainbow Six Siege. It's like almost everything that we do in some capacity. So it wasn't hard to like describe the game program to senior leaders, and the use of drones and the use of different weapon systems, different operators for the roles they provide, and how to counter other things. All that stuff was easy enough to bring forward. Communication was huge for us. So we were able to say, hey, within this short amount of time, they have to solve a problem, fight against a known enemy, a defensible enemy, and use assets like drones and weapon systems to achieve the mission. Done. Okay, that's too easy. But then how do you describe physical? And this is where you might have also seen where, like, obviously everybody thinks we sit down in front of a computer for hours and hours on end, and you lost a little bit of that health and being active and doing the physical components. Well, we countered that as well by telling them that this isn't going to be all they do. They still have to meet all the physical requirements of the academy. They still got to do all the different physical fitness testing. I have many a player right now that's in the gym more often than most. So we really just had to battle all the same, connotations that people have had about esports, and just layer it on top of the fact that we're dealing with an academy that was founded in 1802, that its infrastructure is extremely rooted in history, and the graduates and people that reflect back on that would be very upset if they're like, how come they're not in the woods, or how come they're not raw, just mad. And then that's what I had to fight through. And it's still there.
Okay, just for our viewers out there, that makes you 14 years older than SUNY Potsdam. So SUNY Potsdam is the oldest SUNY school. We were founded in 1816. So
probably still some of the same problems. Go ahead and try to start a new course at SUNY Potsdam and see how long that takes you.
Well, you know what? We've adopted a new mindset. We are now attempting to be deliberately nimble in our adaptation. So we have a new learning design 12 credit hour postgraduate certificate that we're working on that's stackable to our graduate degrees. And it looks like it's going to move through in relatively short order. It's very sensible, and I like the direction that the institution is going in, and trying to be nimble, especially as, in an information age. You kind of have to be, right? Because things change so much, especially, just with AI alone. Okay, so next question for you then is, let's kind of skip to the fun stuff, right? When we work backwards from it, but paint a picture for what an esports competition, or maybe even a season leading up to a playoffs, might look like and feel like from the perspective of you as the director, and maybe the people participating. What does it look like? Tell us, paint a picture for us.
Well, our program is mirroring the Army's structure. We have a decentralized approach. So as the head administrator for the program, I have a counterpart and a cadet, who we call the cadet in charge. This cadet in charge is simulating what would be a platoon leader of some sort, and that the platoon leader is going to manage anywhere from 30 to 40 people. We have 75 people in the program. So in order for this individual cadet now to manage the 7 different game titles and all the different players and different teams, we have to create the game captains, thus creating team leaders. So we're continuing to mirror how the Army would want to teach our soon-to-be lieutenants how to, decentralize requirement and delegate. So he's delegating his authority to run each game platform, and now each game captain is going to be responsible for the performance of the game. So now when they approach their seasons, they can make the decision based on the performance of the players as, hey, we're just going to take a practice season. We're going to get into scrimmages. We're going to get into our individual skill sets, and we're going to take a 3 months off. Or, hey, this team is ready. Let's get into league. And what happens is the game captain is now going to bring to the attention of the cadet in charge which league they're going to compete in and why. It could be this individual understands the energy that's in the game. They may just want to have fun. There may be a click kind of thing and friendship. They just want to casually play but get after it. Or they're like, no kidding, really trying to win a championship. So they're going to go into the leagues that people would agree upon are the most competitive leagues. As you can imagine, in your experience in esports right now, all the competitive leagues are a wild, wild west. We don't know who their top leagues are, who's what, or who's whatever. So what we ask them to do is make sure that when you think through how the game is going to perform and all the players in the game are going to perform, does it fit within your reschedule capability? Does it fit in to how you're going to manage all everybody's time and practices in white space? Because a lot of these leagues have strict rules on the days you're going to play, the hours you're going to play, your rescheduling restrictions, how often you can reschedule. So if it doesn't fit, you got to make it work. And that's part of that extra training that they're getting and being a part of this esports program that they wouldn't get in the classroom. They're getting real-time repetitions on how to manage small unit teams. And that was a big selling point for us in the program. So painting a picture, right now we're dealing with that with our Overwatch team. Our Overwatch team qualified for the CECC championships in Texas in the Service Academy bid. So they have to prepare themselves to take on former pro Overwatch teams that, and it is like, hey, we just do the best we can, I mean, you can be realistic. These teams are fantastic, monster, I mean, super programs, but we're not going to shy away from a fight. We're Army, I mean, more than that, we're going to do our best and we're going to throw our hands up and we're going to fight. But for them, it's all about travel. It's all about the experience. It's about all about that. So they're going to control every left and right limit. I get involved for logistics. I get involved for arbitration. I get involved with, how the brand is being represented. So what I like to do is make sure that everything is very professional in nature, how the cadet is presenting themselves. So that process is really up to them.
A couple of follow-up questions that I'm very curious about. Do you allow in any streaming or broadcast of the Army's teams, the comms? So when your communication, right, among each other, because I know there's a little bit of a PR thing about internal communications. Like, how do you handle that?
We do. We put up a warning order. So whenever our tech director, we have a brand new tech director, her name is Sophia, will look at the captain and say, hey, you're about to go live listen in. And everybody's like, oh, okay. And then they switch gears and they turn into cadet mode.
Okay.
But
even during competition.
Even during competition, it's part of the live sheet, to make sure that we know at the certain times, depending on which game's going, because there's a natural pacing with certain games and where their natural breaks are. COD, for example, that has a good example of how the Call of Duty League has the sponsored live listening. We mirrored that and said, hey, at a certain point when the map starts, you might take the first 15 to 20 seconds and listen to the players talk about their positioning. Hey, I'm stairs. Hey, I'm stairs. Hey, I'm yellow. And that's safe. You don't want to turn on the mics when it's a 1v3 or something it's about to be over, because that's when it's all going to be all natural, So it's all about when you decide to turn the mics on too.
And do you have any sort of like post-production say with the competition organizers about, I don't think that represented us very well. Maybe we should not put that out on our YouTube channel or social media or, things like that when the Army's competing?
Absolutely. I'm lucky enough to be the guy that makes that decision in regards to what we put out. I have full control in regards to, respect to our public affairs office and respect to any other leadership cells that want to get a cursory look at our post production and what we're putting out. We have the set branding guidelines that we all understand are true, and the representation of the brand, the different colors that are used in their coatings, all that stuff is standardized. So yeah, we definitely want to make sure, like, hey, that's not going on air. No,
Right.
we like it though, because it's like, it's them, it's really what happens. So we're not going to like shy away from that, but then we're going to make the right decision to be like, hey, no, this is not how we want to represent.
So if I were to talk coach to coach for a second with you,
Sure.
One of the things that I've done in various coaching roles is we do scouting reports on our teams that we're facing. So if I were a coach playing against your team, what would be the scouting report on your team? What do you do really well that we need to pay attention to that may be different from other teams, especially? And maybe what weaknesses you have that we could exploit?
Well, first of all, when you face Army, you face blunt force trauma. It's a very aggressive. It's fast. Understand that we communicate extremely well. So and if you for some reason figured out the plan, there's always a second and third plan. We call it PACE: primary, alternate, contingent, and emergency. So this acronym allows us to have three different strategies that are going to happen just in case this team already did their research on that, and they immediately give me indicators that you've already sniffed out our bomb placement or what site we're going to. A lot of the commands that come out for us, if that does come out, are single word commands like, hey, go amber, hey, go, go phase line, whatever. Again, mirroring the Army speak about where we are in regards to the strategy, what phase line we're at, or what's actions on the objective, or what our support channels should be doing. So you just got to be prepared to bring your game, because we're literally practicing the things that we do as Army officers in esports. Weaknesses for us is just time. We don't have the time to put the hours in, because as a service academy, we can't. We literally have 22 to 23, semester hours per semester. Like, the credits on them are absolutely bonkers. The most I can get my players to practice a week is like 8 hours, if that. So you're really going to beat us simply because we just can't put the hours in to get better.
It's interesting. I do want to go down this rabbit hole a little bit. This idea of quality instructional time versus instructional time. Because learning happens not in a straight line, right? There's times when everything's activated and we learn really well. That over time you probably have metrics for this within the Army, of that there's certain time before your brain just kind of starts shutting down. So I would share a quick story from my daughter, who's running track at Buffalo next year, and she was explaining to me that she was looking at the NCAA people and what they're doing. There's a young lady setting records in the 10K, I believe it is, and I think she was explaining that her 10K time is right around 30 minutes, which is pretty impressive for a 10K by any standard, right? And I think it's setting NCAA records. She was explaining, because she's going to be a competing athlete in that space, she wanted to know what her training regimen was. She only runs twice a week.
Okay.
Cross trains the rest of the time. So I am a firm believer in cross training. I think it's one of those things that, as a sort of coach of youth sports, varsity sports, college sports, I find that my cross trained athletes tend to be my best players. The ones who have sort of focused on the single sport are good until things don't go the way they were planned or expected. So I wonder if the nature of this well-rounded, young soldier that you have is something that would be a real strength, especially as things, in my experience, that cross-trained athlete, when things don't go as planned,
Yeah.
they tend to not react in a high emotional way, but in a sort of informed, experienced way, where they're kind of like physiologically prepared for it, right? So if learning happens not just in the mind, but the body, it's almost like their body is also prepared to receive, this crazy dissonance that may happen. So I wonder, do you feel that's a strength of your team, and how do you, that might compensate for the extended practice hours that somebody who doesn't have the requirements of a cadet might have? How does that balance?
It balances because the way their courses are delivered, we have a strict 55-minute course load. They have, the Thayer method asks a lot of our cadets to think as they were also an instructor. So a young woman that's fresh to the academy would actually have another woman that's a second year cadet that would actually be her instructor in like a 70% capacity. We find that that helps with the retention of the second year cadet. And then in turn, it demonstrates to I always say, I'll take that back. Fourth year cadets are our freshmen. Third year cadets are our sophomores and so forth. So this now, subordinate to the other cadet would actually have a working example of how they can also be successful by seeing it happening from their mentor. That ability for them to be responsible for those things and then cross bleeding into their responsibility for running an esports competitive program, they may actually get to solutions a lot faster than somebody like, hey, what do I do next? Well, I've done this, and having forcing me to be an instructor for a weapon system. I had to design introduction to the M4 and how to run the M4 range as part of their requirement to be, a sergeant, a simulated sergeant. So we'll see that. That's where I get a lot of these cadet captains that also have a coach that works alongside them, because we know also that some people are better jobs than others. There may be a good administrative leader, but not as good of a coach. So we'll have an in-game leader that's actually not the game captain, and you have these different roles that are inside of it, because we want to encourage people that do things well to do those things, but at the same time, we want to encourage people that are not doing these things well to get a chance to get better. So we've actually rotated those job slots and then reverse that. Somebody that works for my esports program as a cadet captain or an in-game leader can transfer their learning in the esports program to what they'll have to do as some kind of leader during the summer. Oh yeah, I experienced this. I built the whole training regimen for my esports program. I could just, we would all agree it's not true transfer, but it's like, hey, I can take these elements and mirror it for when I'm responsible for teaching somebody about land nav.
So the Thayer method, just explain that a little bit for some people who might not be familiar with it.
Well, Colonel Thayer who was identified as the founder of the academy, one of our first superintendents, mandated that the classroom size does not exceed a 1-to-20 ratio. So you have the one expert with up to no more than 20 cadets. And that as much as possible within your structure, you want to have a cadet be in a position where he or she is going to be able to deliver learning. You put them in a position where, hey, conduct this lesson number 4 with the lecture, instead of the instructor being in that position 100% of the time. We all know that, there could be circumstances where the individual cadet that's giving the lecture has to know what they're talking about, because you'll have this telephone effect where, like, the blind leading the blind. So staff is always going to be a backstop on the delivery of the learning to ensure that the next class of cadets actually does get the learning successfully. But we encourage leaders to be leaders, and the more you put them in those positions, they're going to take ownership and responsibility of their learning, thus retention.
Okay, so that's similar to some models that we teach kind of in our program, where self-directed learning becomes really important, and the teaching of others also kind of helps, because you don't necessarily have to articulate it in a way that you understand it yourself, but you have to articulate it sometimes in a way that might come at the concept or whatever the skill or knowledge is from a variety of different perspectives, so that the new person receiving that knowledge understands it in a more robust way, or you didn't necessarily need that to explain it to yourself. So I could see why there'd be tangible benefits. The question I'm leading up to is, how do you measure this? And how do you talked at the beginning of the podcast about quantifying and qualifying data to support the efficacy of esports in your simulation center? How do you do this with esports specifically? How are you measuring efficacy?
We try to stay away from win-loss percentages and records as like, hey, we're not about the winning culture, because we believe winning is a byproduct. You're gonna get the winning if the things like, passion and discipline and all those things are your focal point, creating the team. And over time, as they continue to work different strategies, you're gonna have that byproduct. But we maintain our win-loss records. We have an Excel spreadsheet. We look at the different dynamics per game. We try to identify things like, well, this league is a little bit tougher than the other one. So we haven't even crested past a 53% win rate across, I would arguably say it's 75 games per semester. We fluctuate with the amount of teams we also have too. We've had instances where we've taken we have 2 teams per game. We have a black varsity and a gold junior varsity. So if at 1 year, we might just say, hey, let's merge them all together and let's see if we can find the cohesion between that. So through verbal interview, through just looking at qualitative, performance, we actually have sensing sessions where we'll sit down with the players and say, hey, because there's a hierarchy thing for us. And I say some of our sister universities may or may not have this, but we have a rank system for our cadets as well. So we'll have a young freshman that doesn't feel like he or she can actually dictate to the superior, the superior cadet in an esports atmosphere. So I have actually been a part of these sensing sessions, and I've actually told the cadet that's in charge of the game, I was like, hey, we're going to eliminate rank here. And then the young freshman can stand up with the confidence and say, hey, I don't like what's happening to me, and say that without any repercussions. So we have that uniqueness to us as a service academy. Our sister academies like Air Force and Navy probably do as well. So those are how we measure those things. We look at the overall feeling of the team. I also watch for people leaving the program. That's a strong indicator that something's wrong with the individual game. It's not for them. Something's wrong. They didn't expect it to be like this. I've heard things like that in one-on-one verbal interview. So, but other than that, I do a lot of qualitative stuff, not necessarily quantitative pre and post surveys.
So you said you had 75 participants right now. Not to put you on the spot or anything, but roughly what's the male-female breakdown?
It mirrors, actually, it's very low right now. Our female players actually left our women's Rocket League program because they wanted to find balance more towards military training than spending the time doing the train up for that. So the overall mix of men to women at the academy is an 85-15. I think we're at the 5%. I actually my media director is a woman, and our tech director is a woman. I also have a head coach and the assistant director for the program is a government professional. But at one point, we had about 9 players in the program that were women out of the 70 or so. So can't do math online to make myself look bad, but
yeah, that's it's common. It's one of the things that I'm trying to advocate for, is to try to find a space within esports that's a little more female friendly. We're working hard on it at Potsdam. One of the ways we do it is through our streaming. So we have like a STEM streaming component where you can get involved in that aspect of it. You don't necessarily have to be directly competing. So maybe we could follow up that with what other roles besides team competitor are there for people in the esports program, or is it really just, strictly teams? You mentioned the one person who's like the platoon leader or multiple platoon leaders. So I understand the structure, but aside from that structural thing, are there any other roles within the organization of esports for the players?
Absolutely. So at a base, the regulations that govern extracurricular activities require an officer in charge, which is me, or equal to a director, a cadet in charge, which is the top 2. Anything outside of that, you can add or take away. So you can have an assistant OIC. I have 2 assistant directors. Both of them are government employees for that continuity. And I can have multiple assistant cadets in charge. It's usually coming down to interest, or if the cadet in charge is like, hey, I got a friend that could really help me out, and okay, cool, let's just make this person an ACIC. I also look for anybody that's generally interested in that performance. Like, I've had young men and women come up to me and say, hey, I'm really good at social media, or I'm really good at executive officer roles as a logistics management. I'll go, okay, so I'm going to give you some of my work. Because I got it. I'll be the backstop, but why not, join me? Like, for example, I handle all of our sponsorships. There's a huge learning curve for how federal entities are going to work with non-federal entities and have sponsorship agreements and different things that work, so that the general public understands that their taxpayer dollars are used for mission, where they're not being used for what we would call margins of excellence or different things like that. So the whole entire esports program functions off of these non-appropriated funds, what we call NAFI, or non-appropriated funds instrumentalities. The regulation that people would recognize, called the Morale, Welfare, and Recreation, or MWR, that's completely designed for the morale and welfare of a soldier on any post. But what you would find is that certain dollars are not moved towards that because the dollars appropriated by the Pentagon and the things that the taxpayers paid for should be going towards the things that they want. So we find ways to say, hey, we have a great sponsorship with USAA and Extron and different companies like that. We find ways to, support the program with that.
So you basically take all of the roles and responsibilities sort of top to bottom, and as people show interest, you kind of slot people into them, as time and appropriateness kind of.
Yeah, for the ultimate mission, so that young person has that thing. That's why it's a club. There's the club aspect, there's the competitive aspect. I have videographers that love just making really cool hype videos. All right. So here's all the best equipment. Here's cameras that you need. You don't need to bring your own. I have all the baseline stuff. Again, it's not probably the best. It's good enough. And go make a video. Oh, here's a license. Here's the license to our Adobe Premiere suite. Go ahead and get after it. And they have a good time. So, and I have a media head and I have a tech director now where she just loves this stuff. She loves the challenge. So she's coding our stuff into our stream decks. She's building everything in OBS. It's just getting after it and putting color. She's a graphic designer. So, and then I see her up there and she's like at a second home. And that's where it gets out to why we really do the program.
Yeah, offline, I'd like to connect with you and maybe get her name. We teach a content creation course on campus. It should be a wonderful guest for our course.
Yeah, and if you get a chance to visit us, you would love to see the production stuff, the way we built it. And it's unique to us because of space and different things. Yeah, but she would love to.
Do you have, for the listeners out there, viewers, how might we pay attention, look at your videos, watch your team, check out your streams? Do you have any sort of like consolidated web or media presence that we could go to?
Well, you get the basic outward information from us from westpoint.edu/esports. That's going to be where we share with anybody that's a prospective cadet to understand, like, hey, these are the things that are ready for you if you want to come to West Point as your future occupation. You could also easily go to Google or any of your search engine, just type in Army West Point Esports, and you'll see links to our Twitter. You'll see links to our Instagram. On LinkedIn, it's a little bit more me right now. We have a company on LinkedIn, but I spent a lot of time on LinkedIn sharing what we're talking about today is the core design, getting after how we're tying the esports program into what our alumni or our different associations would want to see from the enhancement and growth of our cadets. And I like those discussions because it's actually very true. It's very robust. We can make great connections to what you and I even talked about is just, developing a coaching or developing good coaching styles. And I think a lot of companies and things like that would resonate with that because there's bleed over in how they even manage their people. And then all the young licky chewy stuff that I can't do, like Instagram, and you won't see us on TikTok. Everybody understands why we don't deal with that right now. Things like Snapchat and all that stuff doesn't really work for us because it's just doesn't fit. But
yeah. Okay, so yeah, for you out there listening, it would be westpoint.com/esports. I went there right now. It's a nice landing spot, and you're right. I did a search, and all sorts of things popped up, and including Twitter, so or X or whatever we call it these days. So yes, excellent. So next question for you is, how do you foresee the future? So this is one of my favorite questions. I consider myself an amateur futurologist. I don't know if that's a term I can put on LinkedIn, but I like to think in those terms. And over time, you see patterns, right? And that's really what futurologists do, is they look at patterns and they say, what are the patterns that I've seen? How might I predict these patterns to happen in the future? And what technologies, especially both processes and products, are coming along that might shape those patterns? So based on your experience and what you see, what do you see coming down the line in the near future, or maybe mid to late, let's say the next 2 years, 5 to 10 years, and then maybe after that?
Wow. Yeah, and I like that term. Yeah, because we have to be. Especially administrators that are in a position where you have to look at. I'm going to use some military references. The 50-meter target. like things that are right in front of you. We have deliverables to our bosses or our commanders about achieving the objectives of the academy. Our superintendent is responsible for commissioning officers every single year to the chief of staff and the Pentagon. So his responsibility to get that done. Everybody else underneath that has to meet those objectives. While all that is going on, it's a responsibility for us, course directors or like me, a technology guy, is to look at what's going on the left to right limits. Like we can easily just Google some of this AI stuff, the AR technology, the VR technology, or the term that coins it all, XR, and the applications of mixed reality and things like that. As an instructional designer, and I think a lot of our audience would also accept that, is we understand truthfully what the technology really is, and it's a delivery method. It's not necessarily an enhancement of the learning objectives themselves, but what a student's going to resonate with technology-wise. So somebody like me is, oh, let's go buy the brand newest VR headset. I'm gonna be like, hey, time out, stop. What's it gonna do? But I mean, honestly, I love it. I'll put it on. I'll geek out all day long and have fun with it. But instructional designers are going to look a little bit deeper. They're going to say, number one, you ingested a new piece of a technology that now forces your student to, have extraneous load, and you're not going to get to the lessons as soon as you think you're going to get to them. And then when you develop your technology or your software for those different pieces of technology, what does that even look like? So we're actually not implementing it right now because it's not going to be ready for what we need to provide our superintendent, eventually what's going to provide the cadet for learning. But we're also keeping our finger on the pulse. So within that 3 to 5 years, I'm looking for very small changes. I want to see bigger FOV, field of view, on augmented reality technology systems. Why? Because when I want a student to go into an augmented reality environment, I want them to resonate with what they're already learning or what they're already expected to see. I can't have the element of the cognitive load where they can't see past an index card. That's just the simplest thing. And I say any company out here that solves FOV at a certain point is going to be really rich, because at that point, the interface is just almost like you're not even wearing it. And that tells me that as an instructional designer, I can get after the learning I want to do with that piece of equipment. I can deliver the learning through it. Virtual reality, you just immediately got to deal with a human being just physiologically dealing with a VR before you do anything. So it's way in the future. And then layering on top of that, I'm always the guy that's asking the why. I'm always the red team in the room that's saying, hey, as much as you want this to work, it's not gonna. Why is that? Because I'm an instructional designer, and I'm telling you, you owe your target audience and your stakeholders the solutions they want, and that you're supposed to get. So I am working on this now, though. I'm a futurist like you are, and where we should be in the near future. And we're working on this without anybody even knowing. And then I'm a proof of concept guy. So I'm going to build a small sample size of the proof of concept and then bring senior stakeholders in and say, sir, ma'am, this is exactly what you think. Oh, and they put it on. Oh, and then they have an epiphany, and then the new ideas come out of them. It could be positive and it could be negative. Positive ideas are like, wow, I had no idea it was like this. And then the next thing is, yo, can we do it like this? Can we do it like this? Can we do it like this? And they just start rambling. I'm like, hey, time out. You got the budget for that? That's the kind of stuff we're doing in the short term, and in the midterm, all the same time we're delivering what our superintendent wants and commissioning leaders of character and getting them ready to be second lieutenants. 10-year plan for me is modular design spaces, multi-use, multi-ROI spaces. Our relationship at Extron is a good demonstration of this. All of our sources that come into a single matrix system can export to any one of our destinations that we control. So I have 3 10-foot screens. I have 3 different monitors everywhere. I can take any one of my sources right now and send it to any one of those screens in any capacity that I want. That gives me this freedom of movement, or not having one purchased or ROI for one piece of equipment with one computer. The Extron systems have the ability to process all these different feeds and then layer them together. So you'll see on our broadcast, it's going to be a 4 square split. That's just one element. That's one source. It's not 4 different sources. So now I can compile all that and create this multi-dimensional, multi-changing environment. So here, as instructional designers, we're responsible for creating usable spaces or workable spaces. Imagine the space you create has a left and right limit, and everything inside of that can rechange itself as needed within 10 to 15 minutes. And we can do that right now. So for me, it's doing that better. It's doing it with expansion capability. So when we install power times 4. Every time we put a power receptacle in, instead of it being a 2-port receptacle, we make it a 4-port receptacle. Anytime we put data lines in, we triple it because pathways are just going to grow. Whenever we do conduit, instead of 4-inch, we put 6 inches in. Just have the mindset to know that in 10 years, the technology is going to modify. One of the last things I would say is grab your tech lab, lift up your whole entire tech lab and shake it. Metaphorically, anything that drops out is going to change. Anything that doesn't drop out is going to stay put. All your wiring, your cable track, your power, your projectors, anything that's screwed into the concrete is not going to fall out of the doors. Anything else that falls out can be funded by alumni dollars. It can be funded by sponsorships. It can be funded by whatever, but it's going to fall right out of the room when you lift it up and shake it because it's gone in 2 years. So create the environment so that whenever you shake it and lift it and put it back down, the infrastructure is still there and you can put a whole new suite inside of it.
That's kind of exciting. And I think that's the message when I teach with my students is that enthusiasm, measured enthusiasm, especially with appropriate levels of skepticism, is the sweet spot for the instructional designer, because we're worried first and foremost about efficacy, right? It has to work. And it not just the technology has to work, the learning has to work, right? And I think that's a very measured way to look at it. We're close to wrapping up. I have a few notes here that I wanted to come back on just because they piqued my interest and I held on to them for a little while. The first thing is I'd like to share a personal story of playing America's Army.
Yeah, that's
way back when. I have to bring it up because it was a short-lived and highly, I guess, received very differently among a lot of different spaces. But I will say the one thing I really appreciated about it is that it was one of the only games I've ever played where if you got shot once, you were dead and out of the game and go sit on the sidelines. Right, that's just a mechanic you don't see anywhere. Like you always respawn. Every game you play these days, you respawn. But with America's Army, when you were out, you were out. So we used to play like 8 people doing an infiltration, and it was so tense. The most tense, high anxiety gaming experience I've ever had has been playing America's Army because the consequences were so high. So I wonder, were there any takeaways? Did America's Army lead to anything good? I know it's really not a thing anymore, but what were some of the things that maybe came out of America's Army that it was over 10 years ago, so it's been a while.
It was informative to senior leaders. Like obviously, like you were doing at Potsdam, is you're just keeping your eyes open. You're listening and you're willing to make change. So a lot of our senior leaders, you can go all the way up to the chief of staff, rely on the capability of the sub leaders, the head of TRADOC, the head of the recruiting. America's Army was a recruiting solution. It comes down to it. When a family just can't figure out, especially a family that doesn't have somebody who has served already, what it's going to be like, they obviously go to Google, they start to looking for videos, they look for testimonials, they try to seek out somebody that's been in the Army to really get a sense of the vibe. This solution was going to put you in the place of the training, going to the weapons range, learning about different weapons, and then doing all the different skill sets, and then starting to just be informed. So we were already light years behind anybody that was building a game. You have these monster games that are already been put out, so they're already kind of like under the boot of being able to try to put out a first-person shooter independent of commercial environments that do it already. So the Army Gaming Studio are the ones that built America's Army. And there you are. Like they tried to create a game developer company inside the Army as a solution. Monumentally difficult and monumentally expensive, especially when you're trying to pay for talent that can build a game and do it exceptionally well, do motion capture software, do all that. It really just wasn't sustainable when there's so many more important things that were going on at a certain point. So it was timing. But it was a great it was a great product. I mean, America's Army, your own lobbies. Like I remember like having the one map, and we used to do it internally. We would have like 25 people in the same map, and you would have blue versus gold. And I used to do that for people just come in to hang out at the Sim Center and play. But yeah, that's what it was. It was that solution for somebody to get a taste of what they're about to deal with, thus getting that, that real world experience. And obviously permadeath. That puts a little, sweat on your brow when you're the term getting sweaty. Yeah, when it matters.
The
It
first time it's
matters.
not as big a deal because you don't understand what's going to happen. But the second time you play after you're killed, you know it's coming. That 15 to 20 minutes of just watching everybody, right? Like you're just sitting there on this. That hurts so like, yeah.
Well, it's on its way back. I think there's VR applications that are coming out now that have a very similar style because there's people that really resonate with these games. We were actually a big fans of a game called Squad. There's another game called Hell Let Loose that gets after a lot of that stuff too. I mean, that's historically, designed, but there's still elements of it that you're a part of a larger group. Somebody's in charge. There's a squad leader. I played squad and I was the medic on purpose because I'm all about medics. Like if you have a good medic, you have engineers, you have all the different parts. It all makes sense. Challenges though, when you go to play a game like Squad, you got to have enough machines, you got to have enough servers. So there's always going to be a give and take. Same thing with America's Army. And I just it was pretty cool.
I'm going to wrap up with some fun questions. So you ready? We're going to go shotgun style. What games are we playing right now, Victor?
I just downloaded. Well, I was. Man, what was it? I just downloaded it. It just came out in early access. Saved so much for me remembering what it was. Sorry, I got my phone here real quick. Oh man, oh man, oh man, oh man. It's an APG. It's actually an RPG game that just came out. No Rest for the Wicked. Just came. It's from Moon Studios, and I just like it because the artwork is absolutely gorgeous. I mean, just gorgeous. And the characters they created are manneristic in design. They're not very human, photorealistic. It's just their style. And then obviously it's a game where you just build armor, you build everything, huge inventories. So yeah, I just started that yesterday.
Yeah, okay. Second question. PlayStation or Xbox?
Oh, PlayStation.
PlayStation. Okay. Next question. Favorite old video game system?
Sega. I was a Mortal Kombat guy. Mortal Kombat,
Oh.
Mortal Kombat, Immortal, everything Sega.
So
Three
so you're
buttons.
talking about the Genesis.
Yep, Genesis. Yeah, you're not
Okay.
dating me.
Well,
But
my
like three.
favorites, I go Dreamcast myself, but it's more of a deeper cut. Okay, so Genesis. What games do we have in our top of list in our Steam library? Our
Top of
go-tos, our
list.
go-back to games, the old favorites.
Destiny guy. I started Destiny beta, Destiny 1. I was a big fan where it's more about lore, not necessarily bounties and all that stuff like that. So Destiny is always waiting for me. I could always go back to it. I mean, I'm a Titan, so my Titan's always waiting. If I just want to go back and because I'm a big fan of being a tank player. Even when I play things like New World and Diablo, I'm very tanky. So
You like being out
yeah,
front.
that or I like being relied upon. So if something goes wrong, hold on a minute, stop, everybody, stop what you're doing. The tank is here, and like I've literally had things like come punch me in the face, and I'm like, hey, it's gonna be all right, dude. And I let the fast moving tight, the other players do what they do, the snipers, whatever. I could put up a bubble and save everybody from dying real quick. And then when I
Hmm.
decide to put something in the face, it definitely matters.
Okay. Favorite sports?
Um, I'm a big. I mean, I also coach baseball. I was a little league coach for a long time. I'm a big fan of baseball and football. You'll find me rooting for strategy more than anything. Teams are great. I love colors. I love the stories that the NFL teams say. But some people get mad at me because I'm like, hey, I want this play to go well. Like, hey, but you're rooting for this team. I'm like, no, but you gotta understand, this is gonna be cool if they do it. There's a cool strategy aspect of football that I enjoy.
Tell me about your take on Andy Reid and his lab, if you know anything about that with his Chiefs.
No, I don't know anything about the lab, but Andy Reid
Okay.
is a genius.
So one of his genius things, this is a lesson I try to teach my students as well, is that if you're an instructor or instructional designer, you should be learning from your students as much as you're teaching them, right? And then over time, you have more to teach, right? So Andy Reid has this thing called the lab. I think I'm getting that right, where he has his players are allowed to come to him with plays. And
That's pretty cool.
he tests them out. He doesn't just say yes. He says, "Oh," he agrees to which ones they would test, and then some of them end up making their way into the game. There's a neat documentary on the NFL quarterbacks, and the behind the scenes stuff is pretty fascinating. And from a learning design point of view, I love the idea of the learners, and it sounds like this is what you do as part and parcel to your Thayer method and everything is, you're constantly teaching each other. But that's an interesting tactical thing, is this idea of the lab. Is there something, is this sort of built into the Army? Is this like, oh yeah, we do this all the time? Or is that a little more controlled?
It is a little bit more controlled because it's such high stakes. Everything that we do is going to have some kind of impact, not necessarily on the soldier, but the local population, infrastructure, anything like that. Obviously, we never want to enact what our main goal is to defend the United States. It's all about diplomacy. It's all about getting away from that decision. But when we think about good ideas, we just want to make sure that you thought through every part of the consequences of anything that you do. There's always like, are you a recreational shooter? Do you fire weapons at all personally?
Yes, but not as much as my brother, who runs the gun team. What does he call it? The rifle team at his school. So yeah, we've done a number of that. Growing up in a rural area, members of the Rod and Gun Club, a lot of practice for sure.
If you ask anybody, well, like what, obviously safety message: treat a weapon as if it's loaded at all times. Keep your weapon on safe at all times. Keep your finger out of the trigger well. One of the things we also teach is like, don't point your weapon at anything you don't intend to destroy, and always clear your fires. So if you do intend to fire the weapon system, take a minute to look behind it. Take a minute to look downrange of what's behind it, because you can get really, really hyped up with what's happening right now. You can get really, really focused on what's right in front of you and not realize that you're about to do damage to something that was no part of what was going on anyway. So, that's the discipline that happens with us, that we take that extra second and make sure that when we pull the trigger, the round is gone and it's going to do what it's going to do.
So you do have a loop for creative input, but it's definitely a tightly controlled loop.
Yeah.
You don't want improv on the battlefield. Would probably be something that you don't want, right?
And then you can have instances of our soon-to-be lieutenants creating these, we're like that lab. Hey, come to me with your ideas. Let's have these creative environments, but understand I'm still a lieutenant, and what I say is going to happen with this platoon is what's going to happen. But I'm not going to be that guy that doesn't hear a young woman that comes up to me and say, "Hey, can we exercise like this?" Why do we think the Army's doing CrossFit in some capacities? Because somebody came up saying, "Hey, man, there's a better way to do a sit-up." Well, sure. And then you can see now the ACFT is adjusting itself because we're starting to understand human beings a little bit better. There has to be a commander somewhere in there that says, "Yeah, I'll be more than happy to listen to your ideas." And they unfortunately have to make the choice that benefits all the soldiers. So it's a tough call.
Okay, so we're wrapping things up. Any final questions or thoughts that we didn't get to that you'd like to share?
I think that this cross information communication is really powerful. Learning from you and your TED Talks, all of us communicating, especially across the esports realm, is extremely important. So anytime we can come together and have a collection of ideas, start putting our stuff down to paper. There's there's a lot of data starting to get collected, and there's a lot of publications that are starting to come out. So I would just like to keep that going. We're starting to get into this, nice phase where there's some programs that have been out for like 10, 15 years now that can really show that that qualitative growth over time. We're only 4 years old, but we bring a unique perspective being a military academy, because the decisions we make are a little bit different. I call it the green bubble typology, where I have a little like green haze over us that changes it just a little bit for us, but it's still a lot of the same things that other universities do. It's just a little bit different for us. So when we come to the table, we can come with our solutions, and it may actually resonate well.
Final ask and request. Let's get a scrimmage set up between SUNY Potsdam and West Point for our Overwatch teams.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, that'd be great. I have a cadet captain we can connect with right now. We're getting ready to travel to Arlington, the esports stadium at Arlington. We should place pretty well in the brackets, but I looked at some of the teams already, like Maryville's in it, and it's monsters. So we're like, Yeah.
Well,
So
there's
after
also
that,
scholarship athletes from some of those places as well. I don't know. I mean, scholarship is a weird word when you're talking about West Point, but that's a tough thing when you've got those. They're actually throwing money at some of these players who are coming in as amateurs or even pros coming into these college teams.
I honestly think that should be another podcast of yours when you analyze this. Because remember, the former pro is still a 24-year-old person that really was drawn into a game platform where money was money, man. There were some big, some good salaries coming out for these young men and women. And then when the developers were done with them, what do they do with their lives? Did they have the right mentorship? And I'm very encouraged when a school will bring that person back in and give them the tools they need, get them the degree they want, let them find the occupation that they need. I'm all for playing against them. Yeah, we get stomped, but when you think about the person, you know that they're going to be in a better place. Unfortunately, there's been some really horrible stories about people that have taken their own lives because of some of these things, and it's just a wrong answer all around. So I'm more than happy to face a whole team of former pros, but I would just turn around and say, "Come here, hey, come here, dude, run this 4 mile run with me. Let's see how you feel after that."
Yes.
Yeah.
So although that's now starting to be
I
something that
mean,
these pro teams are doing really well, is they're building in fitness regimens, and they're being pretty deliberate about that. So they might be able to keep up for 4, but they might not be able to put a 40-pound rucksack on their back and go for 13.
my CIC is squatting 405 pounds right now. I've got a COD player that squats 450.
Yeah. No, my bet is you're probably top notch in that regard. Well, this has been a great conversation, Victor. We'll have some follow-ups. I'd love to organize a visit where some of our students could visit your simulation center down at West Point. And we definitely can connect our team captains with Overwatch and see if we can't get something going there. I have to leave. This is the inauguration of our new president is happening in just a couple of hours, so I've got to run to that. And I do want to say that we have a brand new esports lab. So if you were to come up to Potsdam, we could host. And we have a beautiful new streaming room, beautiful room itself, great computers. And this is news as of 1 week ago today. So we are excited to launch this thing. We did a soft launch. That's why we haven't put any press out with it, but we're looking for a more formal launch in August. So that's exciting for us as a school.
Congratulations, happy for you. And we definitely look forward to coming and playing and just really having a great time with the kids. And I say kids, the students, and taking a lot of great photos and having a really good time.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Thank you, Victor, for being our guest today. And we're signing off.